In the 19th century, by some reckonings, 40% of the world's trade passed through the docks of a single English city. 1/3 of all British shipping was registered there. Its dock system stretched 7 miles along the river. Between 1830 and 1930, 9 million people walked its landing stages, boarded its steamers, and left for the New World. It was the second port of the British Empire, and in the decades before the First World War, it was building monuments to itself in Portland stone and granite, as though it intended to last forever. The city was Liverpool. On the 4th of September 1981, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Geoffrey Howe, sat down and wrote a letter to the Prime Minister. He suggested to Margaret Thatcher that the government should not forget the option of managed decline. Spending money on Liverpool, he wrote, was trying to make water flow uphill. He added one more line, almost as an afterthought, that tells you everything about what he understood he was proposing. This is not a term for use, he wrote, even privately. The distance between those two facts, the greatest port and the stony ground, is the story of Liverpool, and the whole of it can be traced to a creek. A tidal creek, silted and brown, running inland from the River Mersey into a low ridge of sandstone. The creek was small. It was not navigable by anything much larger than a fishing boat. It had no particular strategic value, no mineral wealth, and no obvious future, but it had a name, and the name stuck. Liverpool, the pool with thick water. Everything that followed, every ship, every fortune, every ruin, grew from that unpromising ditch in the mud. There are few records of Liverpool's existence before 1207. The Romans apparently never came. The settlement was too small for the Domesday Book of 1086, which is the 11th century's way of saying a place does not matter. The earliest signs of human activity in the area are 6 large pieces of sandstone, the Calder Stone, standing between 1 and 2.5 meters high, older than the pyramids, and entirely uninterested in the sea. For centuries, the land around the pool belonged to feudal lords, who used it for farming, fishing, and occasionally launching soldiers toward Ireland. On the 28th of August, 1207, King John issued letters patent establishing a new borough called Liverpool, and inviting settlers to take up holdings there. John needed a port on the northwest coast from which he could dispatch men and supplies to Ireland, free from the control of the Earl of Chester. The town he created consisted of 7 streets laid out in the shape of the letter H. A castle was built around 1232. A chapel dedicated to St. Nicholas, patron saint of sailors, was standing by 1257. It was, in every respect, a planned settlement, planted on a coast where nothing much had been before, and for roughly 500 years it would remain something very close to a village. By the end of the 13th century, the population was perhaps 1,000. By 1600, it was still only 2,000. The plague came through 4 times between 1558 and 1650, on at least one occasion, killing roughly 1/4 of the inhabitants. During the Civil War, Prince Rupert led a royalist army against the town in 1644, setting up cannons where Lime Street now stands. Then the war ended and Liverpool went back to being small. What it had, the one geographical fact that would eventually matter more than any other, was the pool and the river beyond it. Ships could shelter in the creek at high water, and at high water merchants could load and unload their cargo. But the tidal range of the Mersey was enormous. At low tide, the ships sat in the mud and the merchants waited. It was, to put it charitably, an inefficient arrangement. By the early 1700s, trade with Ireland, the American colonies, and the West Indies was growing faster than the pool could handle, and the writer Daniel Defoe, visiting Liverpool in this period, noted its opulent, flourishing, and increasing trade with an air of mild surprise. But the merchants who controlled the Liverpool Corporation could see what was coming. They needed a solution to the tide. In 1708, they hired Thomas Steers, one of Britain's leading canal engineers, to find one. In 1710, the town council learned that Steers, who was in Liverpool and had examined the site, had his own designs for the project, and that his designs were, by the standards of the age, radical. Thomas Steers was born in 1672, probably at Deptford or Rotherhithe, and is described in a lease agreement of the period as a house carpenter. He had no experience building docks. What he proposed was to convert the mouth of the pool itself into an enclosed dock with quaysides and a river gate so that ships could enter at high tide, and the gate could be closed behind them, holding the water level steady while they loaded and unloaded. Other engineers had drawn up plans and declined the job. Steers, the house carpenter, said he could do it differently, and the corporation, having run out of other options, let him try. Construction began in 1710. It took 5 years. The finished dock opened on the 31st of August, 1715. 660 feet long, 330 feet wide, 3.5 acres of enclosed water, capacity for 100 ships. The cost was £12,000, double the original estimate, at a time when the average labourer earned about £20 a year. The corporation was nearly bankrupted. The dock worked. For the first time, ships could load and unload whatever the state of the tide. London, Bristol and Chester lost significant amounts of trade almost immediately. Liverpool had done something no port in the world had done before, and the consequence was wealth on a scale the 7 streets of 1207 could not have imagined. But the wealth was not innocent. In 1699, 16 years before the dock opened, a merchant named William Clayton had sent his ship, the Liverpool Merchant, to Africa under Captain William Webster. Webster bought 275 enslaved Africans. 220 survived the crossing and were sold in Barbados for £4,239. It was the first known slave voyage from Liverpool. By 1730, 15 slave ships a year were leaving the port. By 1750, Liverpool was the preeminent slave trading port in Britain, overtaking Bristol and London. By the final decade of the trade, between 1793 and 1807, Liverpool accounted for 84.7% of all British slave voyages. The city's merchants built 2,120 ships for the trade between 1701 and 1810. The wealth that the slave trade created was foundational. It funded the docks, the warehouses, the grand houses on Rodney Street, and the civic infrastructure that would make Liverpool's 19th century possible. After abolition in 1807, many of the same merchants turned to building cheaply made, congested housing around the dock areas to accommodate the expanding port's workforce. The housing became slums. They had turned, with the efficiency that commerce brings to even its ugliest transitions, from one form of human misery to another. The population, meanwhile, was exploding. From roughly 5,000 in the early 1700s, it reached 20,000 by 1750 and 77,000 by the census of 1801. During the 18th century alone, the town's population grew from some 6,000 to 80,000, a 13-fold increase in 100 years. Liverpool was first linked by canal to Manchester in 1721, then to the St Helens coalfield and to Leeds. Lancashire cotton, Cheshire salt and local coal flowed outward through the docks. Sugar and tobacco flowed in. The number of vessels entering the port nearly quadrupled between 1795 and 1835. 4 more docks were built in the 18th century alone, and still the traffic outgrew them. By 1821, the population had reached 118,000. The old dock itself was becoming too small for the traffic it had created. It was filled in and buried in 1826, and the city expanded northward over it, building new docks, bigger docks, docks that could handle the next generation of ships. What Liverpool needed now was a way to move goods inland at speed, and in 1821, a man named William James, having seen a locomotive in Newcastle and experienced the high tariffs on the canals between Liverpool and Manchester, began drawing plans for something unprecedented. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway was the world's first intercity railway, and its construction was neither easy nor uncontested. George Stephenson, appointed chief engineer, was dismissed and then reappointed. Canal owners fought the project with everything they had. The route required a viaduct across the Sankey Valley, a deep cutting blasted through rock at Olive Mount, a tunnel beneath Liverpool, and an innovative method of laying track across 4 3/4 miles of the boggy wasteland called Chat Moss. In October 1829, with the line nearly complete, the directors held the Rainhill trials to determine whether locomotives or stationary engines should haul the trains. 10 locomotives were entered, 5 competed. Over 10,000 people packed specially erected grandstands to watch. The Rocket, built by George and his son Robert Stephenson, was the only locomotive to complete the trials. It averaged 12 miles per hour with a top speed of 30. Robert Stephenson, reflecting on the spectacle, said that the trials at Rainhill seemed to have sent people railway mad. The railway opened on the 15th of September 1830. 8 decorated trains took part in the procession, including the Rocket, with the Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington, aboard an ornate carriage pulled by the Northumbrian, driven by George Stephenson himself. Thousands of spectators crowded every vantage point along the route. At Parkside, near Newton-le-Willows, the engines made a scheduled stop for water, and William Huskisson, the Member of Parliament for Liverpool and one of the railway's most ardent supporters, stepped down from his carriage despite passengers being advised to stay inside. He approached the Duke of Wellington's train. The Rocket was coming down the adjacent track. Huskisson was struck, his leg crushed. Stephenson detached the Northumbrian and raced him to Eccles at 36 miles per hour. Faster, it was believed at the time, than any human being had ever travelled. But Huskisson died in the vicarage that evening. He was the first widely reported railway passenger fatality in history. His monument stands in St. James Cemetery, Liverpool, in the shadow of the Anglican Cathedral, and nobody visits it much. The railway transformed Liverpool's economics overnight. Raw cotton could now reach the Manchester mills in hours instead of days. Finished goods flowed back for export, and the city, armed with the dock and the railway, began to build itself into something that no English provincial town had been before. In 1824, a man named Jesse Hartley was appointed dock engineer to the Liverpool Dock Trustees. He was a stonemason's son from Yorkshire, who had worked as a bridge master. He knew stone, timber and rivers. He had never built a dock. He would hold the post for 36 years, and during that time he would build or alter every dock in Liverpool. The dock estate grew from 46 acres to 212 under his tenure. His masterpiece was the Albert Dock, designed with the architect Philip Hardwick, constructed between 1841 and 1846 at a cost of £782,265. It was the first non-combustible warehouse system in the world, built entirely of cast iron, brick, sandstone and granite, with no structural wood whatsoever. Hartley tested his designs by constructing a dummy structure, filling it with timber and tar, and setting it alight to see how it burned. The columns lining the quayside were cast iron. The corners were curved so that ship's rigging would not snag. Prince Albert opened the dock in 1846. 2 years later, the dock was modified to feature the world's first hydraulic cranes. The dock and its warehouses now constitute the largest collection of Grade 1 listed buildings in the United Kingdom. St. George's Hall, designed by Harvey Lonsdale Elms and opened in 1854, combined a concert hall and assize courts in a single building of a scale that would surpass most public buildings in the country. Nicholas Pevsner, the architectural historian, later called it one of the finest Neo-Grecian buildings in the world. The Irish came next. The Great Famine drove them across the Irish Sea in numbers that overwhelmed every institution Liverpool possessed. Over 90,000 entered the town in the first 3 months of 1846. Nearly 300,000 arrived in the 12 months following July 1847. Many died of disease in the overcrowded cellars and courts behind the docks. A mass grave of 6,000 lies at Anfield Cemetery, between the two football grounds that would later make Liverpool's name in an entirely different way. The population reached 376,000 by 1851, swollen by desperation from across the water. But the growth was not only Irish. Liverpool had become the gateway. The Cunard Line, established in 1840, and the White Star Line ran regular transatlantic services from the Mersey. The Lusitania, Cunard's great pride, 31,550 gross register tons, was registered at Liverpool. The Titanic bore the words "Titanic Liverpool" on her stern. Between 1830 and 1930, 9 million emigrants departed from Liverpool for North America, Australia, and New Zealand, making it probably the greatest emigration port in world history. Of the 5.5 million Europeans who crossed the Atlantic between 1860 and 1900, 4.75 million sailed from Liverpool. A Victorian commentator described the city, not unreasonably, as the New York of Europe, a world city rather than merely British provincial. In 1893, the Liverpool Overhead Railway opened, the world's first electrically operated elevated railway, running 5 miles along the docklands from Alexandra Dock to Herculaneum Dock, later extended to 7. Locals called it the Dockers' Umbrella. At its peak, it carried almost 20 million passengers a year, riding above the cranes and the warehouses and the perpetual commotion of a working port that never slept. And then the monuments. The Three Graces rose at the pier head in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, as though Liverpool were writing its own obituary in stone before it knew it needed one. The Port of Liverpool building, completed in 1907, Edwardian Baroque, crowned with a grand dome, headquarters of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board. The Royal Liver Building, completed in 1911, its twin clock towers topped with the liver birds, those mythical creatures that legend says would, if they ever flew away, take the city with them. The Cunard Building, completed in 1917, an Italian palazzo in Portland stone, headquarters of the line whose ships had connected Liverpool to every continent on Earth. By 1901, the population was nearly 685,000. Liverpool was, by every measure that mattered in the age of empire, the second city of the realm. Walk its streets on a Saturday evening in 1955, and it was still possible to believe this would last. The waterfront was a working port. The overhead railway still ran above the docks, though the ironwork was getting tired, and the carriages rattled more than they used to, and the wooden decking vibrated under the trains in a way that made passengers look down at the river and wonder. Cranes swung against the sky. Ships' horns sounded on the Mersey. The smell was salt water and engine oil, and the faint sweetness of raw sugar being unloaded at the Tate and Lyle works. Dockers came off shift and headed for the pubs on Scotland Road, or the dance halls on Lime Street, or the picture houses that lined the city centre in those years when cinema was still the thing you did with your evening. The Philharmonic dining rooms on Hope Street poured drinks under Art Nouveau plasterwork that no publican would commission now, and the Adelphi Hotel, which had once received transatlantic passengers stepping off the boat train, still served meals as though the liners were coming back tomorrow. At the Empire on Lime Street, the musical Wedding in Paris was playing to full houses, and come December, George Formby would be starring in the pantomime at the Royal Court. The Mersey ferry ran its crossings to Birkenhead and back, as it had done since the monks of Birkenhead Priory started the service in the 12th century. Works outings came to Liverpool from the mill towns of Lancashire, walked the waterfront, stared at the liver birds, and went home with the taste of salt air and chip fat and the conviction that they had seen somewhere that mattered. In the late 50s and early 60s, something stranger and more durable than commerce would emerge from these streets. The Mersey Beat Sound, the Cavern Club on Matthew Street, the Beatles. Liverpool had survived the Blitz, the most sustained bombing of any English city outside London, losing around 10,000 houses. It had rebuilt, new factories were being allocated, multinational manufacturing firms that Merseyside had worked hard to attract in the 1940s and 50s were providing jobs. The economy, if you did not look too closely at the underlying numbers, appeared to be functioning. The docks had been there for 240 years. They would be there for another 240. This is what Liverpool believed. It was not true. In 1956, the same year the overhead railway closed, an American trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean loaded the first standardized shipping containers onto a converted tanker in New Jersey. The container would do to the world's ports what the railway had done to the world's canals. It would make most of them obsolete. Liverpool's Victorian dock infrastructure, with its narrow lock gates, shallow basins and warehouses built for break-bulk cargo handled by hand, was precisely the kind of port the container was designed to replace. The Seaforth Dock Container Terminal opened in 1971, the largest dock in the United Kingdom, incorporating the world's largest dock gates. But Seaforth was at Bootle, to the north, away from the city. The South Docks, the ones that had built Liverpool, the ones Jesse Hartley had spent 36 years perfecting, closed one by one. The number of registered dock workers fell. Unemployment in areas adjacent to the docks exceeded 40%. Simultaneously, Britain's entry into the European Economic Community in 1973 shifted trade eastward. An Atlantic-facing port became less strategically vital when the country was pivoting toward Rotterdam and Hamburg. Liverpool was on the wrong side of England. It had spent 3 centuries facing west, and the world had turned. The damage compounded. The multinational manufacturing firms that Merseyside had attracted in the 40s and 50s retrenched in the wake of the oil shock, closing their branch factories. Liverpool's economy shrank on most fronts at once. The Albert Dock complex, Hartley's masterpiece, was abandoned by the early 1970s. The architectural critic Ian Nairn made an impassioned plea in his 1967 BBC series to save it from demolition, but the warehouses were covered over with concrete and left to rot. The Tate and Lyle Sugar Works, a mainstay of the city's manufacturing economy, closed in 1981. An average of 12,000 people were leaving the city every year. 15% of the city's land was vacant or derelict. Between the censuses of 1971 and 1981, 12 of Liverpool's 33 wards lost more than 20% of their residents. Only 2 gained any population at all. Park Lane and its surrounding streets, at the heart of the traditional maritime district, had been a busy residential and shopping area into the 1960s. Within a decade, it was empty. The city was hollowing out, ward by ward, street by street, and no one in Westminster appeared to be watching. Then, on the evening of the 3rd of July 1981, police officers on Selborne Street near Granby Street in Toxteth arrested a 20-year-old photography student named Leroy Alphonse Cooper. The arrest was watched by an angry crowd. Over the weekend that followed, disturbance became riot. Petrol bombs and paving stones were thrown. Buildings burned. At 2:15 in the morning on the 6th of July, Merseyside police fired CS gas grenades into a British street for the first time outside Northern Ireland. The violence lasted 9 nights. 460 police officers were injured. More than 70 buildings were demolished or burnt out. 1 man died. The Rialto ballroom, where people had danced on Saturday nights for decades, went up in flames. 2 months later, the Chancellor of the Exchequer wrote his letter. Geoffrey Howe's memo of the 4th of September 1981 is one of the most remarkable documents in modern British political history, not because of what it proposed, but because of what it admitted. He told Thatcher that Merseyside was the hardest nut to crack. He warned against concentrating limited cash into Liverpool and having nothing left for more promising areas such as the West Midlands or the North East. He said it would be regrettable if brighter ideas for economic renewal were sown only on stony ground on the banks of the Mersey. And then he wrote the line that when the papers were released under the 30-year rule in December 2011 would confirm what Liverpool had always suspected. I cannot help feeling that the option of managed decline is one which we should not forget altogether. We must not expend all our limited resources in trying to make water flow uphill. He knew what he was saying. His own caveat proved it. This is not a term for use, even privately. He used it anyway. Against Howe stood Michael Heseltine, the Secretary of State for the Environment, who arrived on Merseyside in the summer of 1981 and spent 3 weeks walking the streets, talking to community leaders and developing what he would later describe as the conviction that Liverpool's problem was not a lack of money but a lack of leadership. Heseltine pushed for intervention. Thatcher, to her credit, backed Heseltine over Howe. The Merseyside Development Corporation was established in 1981 with a mandate to regenerate 200 acres of dockland for housing and commercial development and another 200 for recreation and public space. The results were uneven. The International Garden Festival of 1984 was built on a reclaimed former oil and naphtha terminal along the river at enormous public expense. The magnificent site was then handed to a company called Transworld, which went promptly into receivership. The Albert Dock fared better. The Arrowcroft Group proposed an ambitious vision to the Development Corporation, and over £100 million was invested in restoring Hartley's fireproof warehouses. Tate Liverpool opened on the 24th of May 1988. The dock was officially reopened by the Prince of Wales, the great-great-great-grandson of the Prince Albert, who had first opened it in 1846, which is either a sign of continuity or a sign that nothing in England ever really changes, depending on your politics. ITV's This Morning began broadcasting from the dock in 1988, Richard Madley and Judy Finnegan presenting each morning while a weatherman jumped across a floating map of the British Isles in the dock basin behind them, and for a few years Liverpool appeared on morning television as something other than a cautionary tale. But the arithmetic of decline had its own momentum. Liverpool's core population, which had peaked at around 846,000 in the 1931 census, sank to 452,000 by 1991 and 439,000 by 2001. The city had lost more than half its people. By 1985, unemployment exceeded 20%, roughly double the national average. In Knowsley, on the city's edge, just 7% of 16-year-old school leavers were finding employment. The economic shocks of the 70s had come and gone, and what they had left behind in Liverpool was not a recession, but an absence, an economy with the centre cut out. The port still functioned, but it functioned at Seaforth, away from the city, with a fraction of the workforce the old docks had required. In the 1960s, 12,000 men had worked Liverpool's docks. By 1980, the number was 6,000. By the mid-90s, it would be 500. Among them was Mike Carden, a third-generation Liverpool docker who had followed his father onto the waterfront. Carden would later write of the camaraderie on the docks, bonds built on shared labour and shared risk that he said could not be replicated anywhere else. He watched the workforce contract around him for 3 decades, and in 1995, 500 dockers, Carden among them, were dismissed by the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company for refusing to cross a picket line. The dispute lasted 2 years and 4 months. Not one of them was reinstated. Carden died in 2021, the trade that had defined his family gone before him. European structural funds arrived in the 1990s. The city won the bid for European Capital of Culture 2008, beating Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, Newcastle and Oxford, and the announcement in 2003 brought investment, attention and a drive for major new development. Liverpool won a 43-acre retail development, the largest open-air shopping centre in the country, opened in 2008 and changed the character of the city centre overnight. UNESCO had awarded World Heritage status in 2004, recognizing Liverpool's maritime mercantile city and its docks as a site of outstanding universal value. Then, in July 2021, the committee voted narrowly to revoke the designation, citing concerns about overdevelopment, including plans for a new football stadium. It was only the third such removal in the programme's history. Liverpool's response was characteristic. The city's tourism industry grew by 21% after losing its heritage status. Sometimes the most effective reply to being told you are finished is simply to carry on. And then something almost accidental happened. In 2001, during excavations for the Liverpool 1 development, construction workers broke through the floor of a demolished office block called Steers House, named with the carelessness of a city that had forgotten its own origins after the man who had built the thing they were about to find. 40 feet below the present ground level, beneath the car park, beneath the retail units, beneath the layers of brick and concrete that 3 centuries of commerce had deposited over the spot, they found the sandstone walls of the old dock. The world's first commercial enclosed wet dock opened on the 31st of August, 1715, buried and forgotten since 1826, was still there. Oxford Archaeology North excavated the site between 2001 and 2008. The developers, Grosvenor, preserved the dock within the design of Liverpool 1 and built a visitor facility around it. Liverpool today is a city of 486,100 people, according to the 2021 census, a 4.2% increase from 2011 and the first sustained population growth in decades. It is still barely more than half the city it was at its peak. The economy runs on services, education, health and tourism. The Albert Dock welcomes over 6 million visitors a year, the most visited multi-use tourist attraction in the United Kingdom outside London. Heseltine, reflecting on the transformation, noted that in 1980 there were 1,000 hotel beds in Liverpool. Now there are 9,000. The 3 Graces still stand at the pier head, the liverbirds still watching over the city and the sea, and the legend that says if they fly away, the city will cease to exist has so far not been tested. Every day, thousands of people walk through Liverpool 1 without knowing what lies beneath their feet. 40 feet below the shopping centre, accessible by a flight of stairs that descends through the layers of the city's history, the old dock sits in the darkness where it has sat for 200 years. A modern bridge and walkways give visitors a view of the original sandstone bedrock of the pool, the tidal creek that gave Liverpool its name. The brick dock walls that Thomas Steers built rise 20 feet from the bed of the creek. In the sediment, archaeologists found the complete skeleton of a pony that once worked the dockside and a clay pipe scratched with the words Liverpool 1. The pool has not moved. The city grew over it, expanded beyond recognition, reached across the ocean, handled 40% of the world's trade, was told it was stony ground, lost half its people, and then, digging the foundations for something new, found it again. The dock sits in darkness now. Above it, the commerce carries on.